Okay, so we're ready to go? Okay, so let's begin with Alex. Alex, you have been participating in the HB Journal Translation Project. Can you tell us your role in it?
Yeah, sure. I've been a volunteer in the Journal Translation Project, and the volunteer work has been relating to the tools, online software tools, and my day job is as an engineer working for Google doing cloud computing, and I like to help in things that are related where I have technical expertise and I can help out. So at first, when it first got started, I was helping out in advising what tools to use, the modern tools, and then in the data preparation of the a glossary for it, the terms. So a lot of terms, took a bit of research on figuring out a lot of practical things like people and place names that were written in the right way according to the location, with a Hong Kong or a Taiwanese spelling or Korean even. And then pinyin, of course, for the mainland ones. And then the a reader style user interface for the journal articles to help the translators discover that terminology and match it against the text they were translating.
Does the NTI reader, which you have developed, have any part in the HB Journal?
Yes, it does actually. The HB Journal, the translators use a tool called the HDL.org or Singyun Digital Library website that is based on the same software and has the same base dictionary as the NTI reader, which is the NTI reader is a project that I did that is for reading the Taisho Tripitaka. And then that software that I developed for that actually can be used for other Chinese corpora. And the HB Journal is an example of a corpora that can, it's used for that. So I adapted the style sheets and the text content itself actually.
And what actually prompted you to name it after Nantian? This is quite interesting.
The NTI reader? Well, that's a good question. I didn't have a good name for it, and I was studying at the NTI, Nantian Institute at the time as a student there, and in the master's program, MA program in Buddhist studies, and thought of a name for it, and I thought it'd be a good tool for students learning Buddhism, because there's so much terminology in Buddhism, and also the language can be a challenge to read. So I thought Nantian Reader, this is as good a name as any as I could think of, and I wanted it to be kind of a gift to the Nantian Institute, so it would be just freely available to everybody, and they would get some credit for it.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure, of course, though.
The NTI reader, as you said, was made for classical Buddhist language, and yet our journal is contemporary language. How did you deal with this shift in the language?
It's a good question. The dictionary that's behind that for the reader, it's an embedded dictionary, so it shows the definitions for all the words in the text. It actually includes both literary Chinese, modern Chinese, and Buddhist terminology, and there is a labeling system, metadata system, where the different terms are labeled for each one. So if modern Chinese, it would be like modern Chinese, and then literary Chinese would be just a different label. So they're all included, because I found that if you're actually reading either a modern Chinese text, Buddhist text, or a canonical text, usually you have a collection of dictionaries, and it can be quite time consuming if they're paper dictionaries, going around to all these dictionaries. And often some of the dictionaries are not, the indexes can be quite time consuming to look up, actually. So I found it more convenient to look it up in electronic form than looking up especially when you have to count strokes and so on. It can be really time consuming.
Okay, thank you, Alex. My question now is for Dr. Lancaster. Dr. Lancaster, you have advised the Guang organization as well as NTI on various projects. So can you tell us a little bit about what advice you offered to NTI when Venerable Joe approached you and asked you to advise on this HB journal translation?
I realized that one of the great contributions that this journal can make is we have so little information in English about humanistic Buddhism. People have not yet written a lot about it. And so much of the data which is in other language, particularly Chinese, is not available to English readers. So I thought that was a really important step for Shan to present this material in both Chinese and English, if possible. And I feel this is one of the great contributions that Shan is making, is that these two languages are being presented to the reading public. And I believe that if you look at the Buddhist world, these are the two major languages, contemporary languages for Buddhist teaching and Buddhist learning. So I was very happy to see Shan and Nantian making this move toward an English translation series that would allow the Western reader to have the chance to see this material.
And during the translation process, what did you see as the team's biggest challenge?
As always, I think, and all of us who do translation, and all three of us here are deeply involved in some form of translation. As we all know, the real issue is often there is no true equivalent for the word. We just don't have an English word for certain Chinese Buddhist phrases. We just don't. The same is true the other way. There are English words for which there's no true Chinese equivalent. So that means that we have to judge our words, not only select them, but then you've got to judge what percentage of the meaning is in this word. And is it enough? Does it come close enough? And so instead of perfection in our selection, we're just looking for good enough. And we feel very happy if we find an equivalent which is good enough. But I would say that's always the greatest challenge before translators.
So this is what Venerable Joe referred to as the ultimate gloss, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you, Professor. Now we also have Venerable Youzai, who is a very important support in the whole project, because standing from HQ, we realized NTI relied a lot on the information you provided. So can you tell us a little bit about the role that you played in this project?
Well, in this project, I have two roles. The first role is to make sure that there's a pool of selection of paper that needed for the board of directors or the committee to be able to select the suitable paper for translation. So during this process, we need to make sure that the topic that we chose for that particular year needs to be that has a Chinese specific topics that are related to that. And a lot of times when we have to do this selection, we encounter problems that we lack this certain topics that we set for the English topic where we don't have it for the Chinese. So in terms of that, how do we find a perfect paper for translation? So But of course, during this process, we try our best to pick up the paper that is the best. But of course, like what Professor mentioned, we can only pick what we have for now and hope that in the future we will be able to find something better. And I think that is the learning process as well. And it's just kind of like writing our research paper in the past, where Buddhism was when we were doing the research back in the 20s and or 30s. Now, back then, those research papers are just perfect to this community. But now, when we look back at all this paper, we find that it's not good enough. Their theory might be wrong, totally wrong at all. But we can't fix this issue, and we can't expect it to be perfect in the sense that it's part of the learning process. When the community grows, we learn together, and we try to make sure that what we learn, what we understand Buddhism will get more to a sense that it's better and better. It's too close to what Buddha has taught us. So that process is necessary, I believe. Yes.
Well, I think it's also your hope, and I think it's the hope for everybody who works with this, that beginning to have this in English will stimulate other people to write something themselves. So if people read an article and say, well, this doesn't quite say it right, or it's not good enough, good, then maybe it will stimulate them to help us extend the field and make it an active field of endeavor for scholarship as well as for practice.
Yes. And my second role is to make sure that this project can be published in print. So once NTI has completed the translation, it will be headed to HQ for further assessments, as well as making sure that all this translation has been done properly before we put it in print. So on HQ, we also go through a process of copy editing as well as proofreading before it's put in print. And we make sure that all this print is done on time, on schedule, and to the right and perfect. Well, of course, the perfect will never be perfect. So we try our best to make sure that it's done properly. So yes, that's basically what I do in this project. So yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Do you have anything else you would like to add about the HB Journal?
I think that's very nice.
Thank you. Thank you. And so that would be it for the HB Journal, but I would like to add a lead-on question about the Guang Dictionary. Okay. And so all three of you are also important participants in the Guang Dictionary translation project. And so my question would be, can you each tell us a little bit about what you think of this project and what do you think the impact of this project will be once it's done?
I think one of the great research reference projects that Shan has carried out was the preparation of this multi-volume Chinese Buddhist dictionary. And it's been used very widely in its Chinese form. But just as with the journal and other things that Shan produces, we recognize that there is an English reading public which is very much in need of an English translation of this great reference work. So I think I speak for all of us to say that to be part of the project of making it available in English is an honor, and we all look forward to seeing it finished.
Yeah, it's definitely an honor to be invited to work on the project. I feel that's great. It really is a challenging project, quite a large one spanning over multiple years. A previous project prepared me a little bit for it, working on the Buddhist Encyclopedia, the Encyclopedia of World Buddhist Arts, which was another multi-year large project that I think Lou also advised on. So I think part of the problem, Professor Lancaster touched on it before, it's hard to find equivalents, but I feel like we've been establishing a large vocabulary because there just wasn't English translations for many of these terms. And I found this with the art terms as well, that there just wasn't, the number of English Buddhist terms we have is just very small, maybe a few thousand, but yet the size of the dictionary is over 30,000 words. So we're establishing all the vocabulary to express a lot of these terms in. So I think that's a really huge challenge. It takes a lot of research. I think most of our time is probably spent on researching. And so that's been really good. It's been also a challenge working on, it's kind of a distributed, kind of crowdsourcing kind of way of doing it. So that has been interesting too, and fun and challenging. I met many new friends, and it's been really good interacting with everybody on the team, and it's been fantastic. It has been a bit of a challenge bubbling up the work from the local groups up to the top, because of course at the top everything is just waiting on a few people, and we have all these people in the groups down the bottom, so we have to really make sure we do a thorough job instead of just rushing along with our work. So that's one of the things we've had to be careful of. It's been really good. I've just really enjoyed all the workshops we've done, have been fantastic. At Kaohsiung in San Francisco, they've been a lot of fun. And learn a lot. I've learned more myself out of participating in this than I thought I would. It's been really a great experience so far.
Well, for the dictionary projects, I think it's one and probably the first projects, translation projects that actually changed the way how we do translation, as well as it also helped us build the database and the data set as well. Because in the past, when we're doing translation, we never thought of putting it together, like especially doing a lot of research beforehand, collecting what other has done, what other has translated. We will just go in and start doing translation. But not that method is not good, right? But the dictionary projects actually change the way how we look at translation, not just in terms of Buddhist context, but also in terms of the historical perspective, in terms of the cultural perspective, as well as the linguistic perspective. So when we talk about like gathering all this data together, it gets very complicated, because we have to put ourselves into that context, that historical context, in order to understand, okay, back then, what language did they use to do the translation? But if we use the traditional translation method, we might just go in, okay, look at the translation, okay, this is how I see it, this is how I understand it, but is that really what it is? So I have an example. When we were doing the translation, we encountered a Tibetan symbol, a term that are related to a Tibetan symbol. So, but this term, the original term is in Tibetan. So, in the Guang Buddhist dictionary, it's already in Chinese. So, when we look at this Chinese term and we have to translate it in English, do we translate the Chinese term itself, or do we have to go back to its context where it's a Tibetan term, but in the first place. So if we were to just go straight into the Chinese term and say, okay, this is the meaning of the Chinese, so I'm going to just translate it to English, then probably we will mistranslate this particular term. So the strategy is that we have to do a lot of prehand research in terms of not just going straight to the translation process itself. So we go through that process in looking for the context, and we realize that it's a it's a pronunciation rather than a transliteration. It's a pronunciation of that particular term that they use for the Chinese. So it's just a sound of that Tibetan terms. So what we have done was that we went back and then just to look for Tibetan resources, anything that related to this Chinese term and the Tibetan terms. So that process is important. If we were to just do it translation, we definitely get the wrong idea. But it's good that we actually look at new methodology in terms of doing research as well as doing translation. So the data can come in later to help other translator to do their translation in this particular field. In this case, it's a Tibetan symbol. So we found more resources in books that are related to Tibetan symbol. So it saved other translators to just go through that process over and over again. So the database actually comes in handy where researcher can actually use it, access it, and in some point where we can actually do the analysis for the translator. But we won't make that decision for the translator. Here, this is what you're going to use. But as a data collector or data researcher, we actually collect, we preserve what has been done. It's really the raw data that has been presented to the translator to make that decision. I think that's very important. So that's...
And I think the care with which it's being done is very good, because we may well be setting the standard English equivalent for the next many decades or the next generations. They're going to depend on this dictionary. And so we have to try to come as close as we can. And you're doing a wonderful job of providing these tools and data to the translators.
I have one final question. You can try to answer it in just a few sentences. We understand the Chinese edition was first finished in 1988, and although it was enlarged in 2014, but when we look at the English translation, which is expected to come out no earlier than 2022. So the question is, in what way will you see the sameness between the first Chinese edition and our finished English edition? And in what way will these two editions be different?
Well, I think that when you're compiling a dictionary, it is an absolutely different process than to translate. The compilers are having to gather data that's explanatory. They have to, in this case, they weren't translating, they were compiling. And they did a wonderful job. I mean, the nuns who put together this huge dictionary, it's amazing how they could collect this much information. But when we start to translate their compilation, our task is quite different. And so we keep reminding ourselves that our job is to translate. We are not to write a new dictionary. We are trying to simply represent exactly as close as we can come to the dictionary which they put together in 1988.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that actually the creating the original dictionary is probably the harder job of the two, because it's so hard to define words. When you write a Chinese dictionary in Chinese, you're defining the definitions or making the definitions. That's very difficult. And you've got to avoid all kinds of problems there, circular definitions and so on, and describing in an understandable way. I think that is actually the harder of the two, and translating is quite a big challenge, and we have a lot of work to do, and it's a massive project, and it's definitely very difficult. But I think actually the work, and monumental work of creating this dictionary in the first place was the major, milestone.
Yeah, I agree with what Alex actually mentioned, because the Chinese, you're doing the compilation is also you can be creative in doing that. But translation, you really just be true to it, to be honest with it, just keep it what it is. But we're not trying to be creative, but just stick with what it is. Yeah, so yes.
Great. That's it. Thank you very much. Great job. 谢谢。